I mean, what is this? This is the. I sat here and did all this stuff for you. Guys, nice of you to join me today. We are going to be going over some math this week. I know it doesn't sound like the most entertaining to do or entertaining thing to do. We should go over English if I don't even know how to goddamn speak. But we're gonna do math this week, and I'll tell you a little story. You're not gonna believe this, but this is 100 goddamn % true. From grades 1 through 8, I did everything that was requested of me with regards to math. I did the adding, the subtracting, the division, all the classics. Okay, I go into 9th grade. Now what they're saying is they want to put letters into the numbers, and now we're going to multiply that, add that, find the value of. And at that moment, and this is a true story, anybody that knows me, ask anybody that if you find somebody that knows me, ask them. I said, this place is a fucking sham, and I never went back. Never did math again until this goddamn week. The comments that Dana White made with regards to the UFC and the numbers that they're pulling in over there. Now, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, Dana does have a point. If we look throughout the time that Top Rank has made a deal, struck a deal with the ESPN in 2017 to now, there has been a dramatic drop in average viewership. But I don't think that Dana is reading the chart right. I think that he would be foolish to think that this is going to be the overall trend for what's going on at Top Rank, ESPN. I think there is a silver lining, but we're going to go through the numbers, and it's going to look not great. The only thing that I ask is that you listen to my video all the way through before leaving a comment or adding any input, because we are going to be getting down to the nitty-gritty this week. I've got graphs, charts, percentages. I'll be hopping in and out throughout the video. If we're talking just about numbers, we're going to stay on the numbers, and we'll stay on the grid and on the line chart. And if I'm going to add in any kind of input or give you any kind of anecdotal evidence or opinion on something, I'll jump on camera and I'll let you know. Now, this is a standard grid. All the way on the left-hand side, you've got 250,000 at the absolute bottom, all the way up to 3 million at the absolute top. On the far end, we have a line that establishes when the COVID-19 pandemic affected the sport of boxing, and the months that correspond this red line are marked in red. In the center of this graph is where you'll find the line charts. I'm going to give you an example with one of these lines. If we look up at this grid, we'll see that a blue highlighted line represents Top Rank on ESPN. We'll see that a silver highlighted line represents ESPN on UFC, and we'll see that a gold highlighted line represents Fox on PBC. Anytime a fight registers below 1 million average viewers, you'll see a red dot at the absolute bottom of that peak. It'll be easier for us to spot all the times said promotional company has fell below the 1 million average viewer mark, if any. The way I worked this out was I took the individual average for each year, I took the total average for all the years, and I took the average of the last 4 fights that Top Rank has hosted post-COVID-19 since the recording of this video. I think the best way to attack this is to look at the current situation over at ESPN as it relates to Top Rank and the UFC. I won't compare PBC on Fox's numbers to Top Rank's numbers because they are on different networks, and I feel that comparison isn't entirely fair. But for right now, I just want to focus on Top Rank and the UFC. Now, at first glance, when we line up Top Rank's trajectory for the year of 2019 going into 2020, and we do the same for the UFC, the difference in terms of performance between the two promotional companies is absolutely striking. And if you walked away from it right then and there, you'd walk away thinking that Dana's probably justified in making the comments that he made in order to get a good idea of what's happening over at Top Rank and whether or not this trend will continue to be the case. Or not unlike a franchise in one of the major team sports, they're in a rebuilding phase. Or is it the other obvious contributing factor? COVID-19, the novel coronavirus that caused this global pandemic, which brought the sporting world to its knees. I think the best way to go about this is to look at the UFC line chart first. Right off the bat, we see a few of these red dots. We know that the red dots signify that they fell under the 1 million mark. But as we go through this line chart, you can see on almost every occasion, they only slightly dipped under the 1 million mark. And on 4 occasions, including one post-pandemic, they were over the 1 million average viewer mark. We know that the headliner for the first one, with 1.4 million, was Francis Ngannou. Any idea of the names of the other fighters? We've got 3 other matches that crack the 1 million mark. And if we follow the line chart to the next peak, over the 1 million average viewer threshold, we see at 1.1 million, Dos Anjos versus Edward. The very next one, Overeem versus Rosenstruck. I hope I pronounced that right. And actually, the very next fight featured, once again, Overeem versus Harris. Now, my knowledge of the UFC is not so strong, but to the best of my knowledge, I think he's a fighter that's trending downwards, if I've got that right. And to close out UFC's year, with the post-pandemic fight that cracked the 1 million average viewership threshold, was Woodley versus Burns. Now, for you sadistic types out there that want to see a side-by-side comparison of the UFC's performance up against Top Rank's performance, from the last post-COVID fight, stretching back to when the UFC-ESPN merger was made for both promotional companies, and the average from that date to this current date that this video was recorded comes out to 985,000 average viewers for UFC since the ESPN merger. And for Top Rank, since the UFC merger, it's been 573,000. So on average, the UFC's putting up almost double the average viewership that Top Rank is. And after the coronavirus hit, they've lost an average total of 20,000 viewers. Now, in the case of Top Rank, we see a much more drastic decline from 573,000 to 340,000. But it's even more troubling when we back away from the graph and take a look at Top Rank and their performance on ESPN since they came to a deal in 2017. Now, this was a short year for Top Rank. It's only 6 to 7 months. But it was a tremendous year. They averaged 1.43 million viewers that year. Now, I'll get into it. There was an outlier. I'll get into it in a second. But nonetheless, it does show that boxing on ESPN is capable of bringing in tremendous numbers. The outlier on that card was Manny Pacquiao. Now, it's not very likely in the past decade that we would have had an opportunity to see the likes of Manny Pacquiao fight for free on TV. This was a one-off thing, and it was a very special occasion. And when you take Pacquiao out of the equation, Top Rank averaged a total of 875,000 viewers. And they're on par with their 2018 numbers. Again, this is removing Pacquiao. And if we move into 2018, we'll see a similar trend. 2 faces that pop up again. Terence Crawford and Vasily Lomachenko. And in 2018, like I said, they actually outperformed if you control for Pacquiao. And if we're looking at it that way, 2018 was wildly successful. We move down the line, though, to 2019. And here's the problem. We lose another face. Now, if we're keeping track, we've got an outlier early on in Beterbiev, and he's off the list. Now, granted, he popped back up on the list, but he popped back up as a red dot. We lost Loma in 2018, and in 2019, at the 12th hour, literally the 12th month of the year, Bud was added to an ESPN card. Now, I haven't ran the numbers on what the year 2019 would look like had Bud not been added to that card. I probably should have, but I'm fucking lazy. But it would have been a lot worse in a year that was already, dare I say, disastrous. And considering the pandemic in 2020, it would get even worse. Now, really quick, we're going to run through PBC's numbers. Now, the first thing that's going to stand out on this line chart and make it look a little bit different than the rest of the line charts is that there's only one red dot. In this case, every single fight that PBC's put on Fox, with the exception of that one red dot. And if I'm being fair, I rounded up for a lot of other people. This fight averaged 965. I could have easily made this look like 1 million, but I feel like, you know, everybody got a red dot, so fuck it. Now, Beyond that red dot, I don't want to spend too much time focusing on PBC because this was not the point of the video, but beyond the red dot, I want to rattle off some of the fights that stand out to me the most, and we'll take a little tour through the line chart to kind of check out all the fights along the way. I'm going to jump off the grid real quick, as a matter of fact, and we'll talk in person. On average, everybody seems to be pulling in numbers, but the names in particular, as far as I'm concerned, that stand out when I look at this year, and I say to myself, what fights brought the most value to the fans and to PBC as a promotional company? I look at the year Jermell Charlo had. Now, this is a year that an undefeated fighter became a once defeated fighter. Not very good, or shouldn't be very good for a fighter of Jermell Charlo's stature. And considering how emotional he is and how emotional he was after taking that loss, and I remember this as a media guy, but also as a fan, watching Jermell take that loss live and in person, the fan in me said, man, I can't wait to see them run it back. I'm going to get somewhere with this. Let's just drive this point home too. Keith Thurman in the very next fight against Josecito Lopez. There's a bit of a story there. Is Keith the same fighter? Is Keith shot? Is he going to come back and be the same guy that we know? Now, in the case of Jermell Charlo versus a Jorge Cota, this is not a must-see fight, but considering the fact that he just lost to Tony Harrison, in which he got outboxed, whether or not you agree with the decision or not, he got outboxed for large stretches of that fight. We go into this Cota fight saying, okay, what if anything, has changed with Jermell's game? There's a bit of a storyline there. And Kovnowski, now granted, not to the same effect that everybody else has a storyline, but again, we want to know if Kovnowski can hang with the current guys at heavyweight. This was not a fight that I was particularly over the moon to even be covering. Now, had I known it was going to be the last boxing match I'd ever be at, I would have been throwing a party. But nonetheless, as a reporter, you get a little bit jaded, and I said, okay, well, let's go ahead and cover this fight. I thought Adam should win handedly, but it didn't go that way. I think that kind of stuff moves the needle, and this value that the customer is getting offered is what drives the overall average viewership to tick up like that. We're looking at the UFC too, right? In the case of the UFC, I'm not a UFC expert by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know a whole lot about the UFC, but I do know some of the storyline. And I look at UFC's year in 2019, and I see that Ngannou fought. He was the guy to hold the banner for the UFC. And I know that storyline. You got to watch the return of Ngannou. You got to find out if this guy was really just a hype job, or is he, or did he just lose to one of the best to ever do it? Can he keep the momentum going? There's a storyline there. Right? If boxing's the theater of the unexpected, and we get these things that are unexpected, I would imagine that goes hand in hand. And I'm not saying that there aren't competitive fights over at Top Rank, but I think that Top Rank does and has always operated differently. And that's not to say right or wrong, but certainly differently. It seems that Top Rank's business model has always been surrounded around having the crown jewels of the sport. And if you look at the current pound-for-pound lists, and really the pound-for-pound lists over history, you'll see that in relation to the size of their roster, Top Rank tends to be overrepresented in terms of how many people get up on that list. If somebody told me with 100% certainty, if some genie came to me and said, hey, listen, Jay, with 100% certainty, the person, the young man, because it would have to be, otherwise we would know who it was, the young man who is going to surpass Floyd in boxing, in terms of success, in terms of every way in which that you could conceive it, is in boxing right now, gun to my head, I've got to pick Shakur Stevenson. That's the guy I pick. I hold him in that high regard. So I guess the point that I make is that his talent is undeniable. If you continue to put him on TV, regardless of what the numbers are now, people are going to have to catch on. Because if that doesn't do it for you, I don't know what will. We'll move on, though. We've got 4 guys, right? So we've got Shakur. Next, we mentioned earlier on the monster. I think we're going to have to figure out a way to unleash the monster. In a way, he's got this thing right now. He's got this, Loma had it in like 2013, 2014. He's got this mystique around him, this aura. He's every boxing nerd's crush, and that's because right now, at the moment, we can't have him. We got to figure out a way to either get the fights to him or obviously get him over here. I don't know what the legality of how we could make that happen, but certainly in my mind, that's a guy who is, I mean, at this point, even at the cusp, 1 or 2 fights away from potentially being a PPV guy, from potentially being a huge superstar, but he can build that platform on ESPN, and that would be amazing. My third guy, we mentioned him before. He popped up on the list one time at 1.4 million average viewers, which is one of the bigger fights ever on ESPN. I don't know what the anomaly was or what happened that particular night that really caused those ratings to spike, but it could just be that it was on the heels of a Pacquiao fight. Nonetheless, Beterbiev, I mean, I don't think it would be a stretch for anybody to say that he's the absolute best at 175 pounds. And we know who's lurking in and around those divisions. If Beterbiev continues to be the hammer, he is going to rip through that division. And I kind of don't care who you put him in front of. And that's a good thing for ratings. And that leads me to the last and final person on this list. And it might not be the pick that you would expect. But nonetheless, I think that I think this is what you need, man. I went out to Brooklyn just recently to visit Coach Andre Rozier. I've got a good relationship with a lot of the guys that are at that gym, and one fighter in particular that I've been following, for some time and been interviewing is Edgar Berlanga. He's fighting on the 21st of July. I've got an interview with him. It's coming up. I'll drop it within the next few days, and I'll notify you when that's going to happen. But the point is, and I don't say this because just because he's a good kid. He is a good kid, but that's not why he's on this list. The reason why Edgar Berlanga makes this list is because he's 13-0, 13 KOs, all 13 in the first round, right? And that stat in and of itself, you would say, immediately you say, who would he fight? Right? So since I spent the entire fucking week doing research and doing math, I figured I'd leave you with this one last little tidbit and piece of information that I found out about Edgar Berlanga to kind of close this piece off and show you why I think that he is a very integral piece in Top Rank's success moving forward if he's the real deal. Throughout history, there's a list of people that have been able to do what Edgar's done. 13-0, 13 knockouts, all 13 in the first round. And beyond that, all the way up to 18. I went through all these names. And everywhere I check, if somebody's got another source, I'd like to know. Everywhere I check, these are the same names that come up. Edgar stands alone from the names on this list. Now, granted, this is not a murderer's row of fighters, but Edwin Valero's on that list. If you combine all the wins and all the losses for all the opponents that Edgar Berlanga has faced, his opponents have a combined record of 129 wins and 59 losses. There's not a single fighter in the history of this sport that has started their career off like that in the past 100 years. Not a single one. Not Mike Tyson, not Roy Jones, not Fernando Vargas, not Edwin Valero, not anybody. You've got to go back to Otto Young and One Punch Hogan. Now, while Dana more than likely has a leg to stand on now with regards to the numbers, when you consider Shakur, Inoue, Beterbiev, and now that I gave you the stat about Berlanga, add him in. When you consider that these are the guys that are going to be on ESPN soon, once they figure out a way, once they work out all the kinks, Dana might be right for now, but I don't imagine that he will be right for long. And the first step towards this Dark Horse Act, this stimulus package, the V-shaped recovery that we seek, is on July 21st. Edgar Berlanga. Guys, I'm going to drop that interview pretty soon. Like, comment, share. I appreciate you guys spending some time with me, and go